Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 23rd, 2022 Community Formation Commission meeting. We'll call this meeting to order at 5:34 p.m. Sam, if we could get a roll call, please.
Sure. Commissioner Adam Leakin.
Here, present.
Commissioner Alonso. I know he is present.
Here.
There we go. Commissioner Chavez.
Here.
Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Commissioner Kim Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Killebrew. Absent. Commissioner Rodriguez.
Present.
Commissioner Sander.
Here.
Commissioner Wood.
Present.
Vice Chair Zepeda. And Commissioner Reynaud. You have a quorum, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. And now we will open up public comment for items that are not on today's agenda. Sam, do we have anyone from the public that would like to give public comment on items that are not on today's agenda?
Yeah, I believe there's a hand raised, so give me 1 second. So if there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand. There is one hand raised, so let me unmute. Mary O'Gorman, you are now eligible to speak.
Okay, can you hear me? Because I can't see my normal.
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I just wanted to check in, say hello, congratulate all of you for, it's been a year last week that we were all sworn in, and a few months since I've left the commission, and I haven't watched a meeting since then, but have been trying to follow. And one question, or not question, but just one thing I would ask that maybe you addressed during the meeting tonight is, at what point or what meeting do you anticipate adopting your final recommendation? Because I know myself and some others would like to weigh in, but I really don't want to do that until you've had the chance to make your final recommendation. So that may be something you talk about tonight, and maybe just post it on the website or something. So thank you.
Thank you. Sam, is there anyone else from the public that would like to give public comment?
Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak on an item not on the agenda? Please raise your hand. There are no other hands raised, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. So we will close out public comment and we will move on to item 4, the administrative agenda, and we'll start with 4A, announcements. This is a good time to answer Mary O'Gorman's question. So we will discuss the Santa Barbara Police Department's position on the draft recommendations tonight. Next week, I hope that we're going to be able to get preliminary findings for both the survey and the focus group from Center for Court Innovation. And then the first 2 Wednesdays, we will begin making edits to the draft, hopefully finalizing the recommendation on April 13th. And we're scheduled for a joint meeting with City Council on April 22nd at 1 p.m. And that's at the David Gephardt room. Correct, Sam?
That is correct. It's 630 Garden.
Thank you. No other announcements. And so we will move on to item 4B, which is consideration and action on the draft Community Formation Commission meeting minutes for March 9th, 2022. Are there any edits to the meeting minutes? And if not, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I believe Louisa Wood is giving a hand gesture that would indicate a second.
All right. So a motion from Christian, a second from Louisa. Is there any discussion? I'm not seeing any. And Sam, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Sure, let me just open it to the public. If there's anyone that would like to speak on item 4B, consideration and action of meeting minutes for March 9th, 2022, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, there's been a motion by Commissioner Alonso, seconded by Commissioner Louisa Wood to adopt the meeting minutes for March 9th, 2022. Commissioner Adam Leakin. Commissioner Adam Leakin. Commissioner Alonso.
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Sam. I'm having issues with my Zoom, but yes,
Okay.
I apologize.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kim Johnson.
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Commissioner Sander.
Yes.
Commissioner Wood.
Yes.
Vice Chair Zepeda. And
Yes.
Commissioner Reyno. Motion passes.
Thank you, Sam. We'll close out the administrative agenda and we will move on to item 5, which is a work group update. The purpose of this is to, it states to form 2 additional work groups, but I think really what we're trying to gauge is what commissioners are interested in being part of the presentation to City Council. I see Lizzie, Rachel. Yes, just raise your hand if you are interested. Give me a second as I write these down. So I have Lizzie, I have Rachel, I have Serafina, Louisa, and Christian.
And just for clarification, I'm interested in the preparation, but I'm not necessarily interested in actually presenting.
Thank you, Lizzie, for that clarification. I'll take note.
And then Chair Escobedo, I'm not able to raise my hand, but you can add me on that list as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm happy to help with either Commissioner Escobedo or Chair Escobedo. That's Rich.
Sounds great. Thank you, Rich. And I see Damo, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, I'm just happy to help as needed. I don't just, you know, if there's an extra person needed, I'm happy to jump in.
Perfect. All right, I think I got everyone. And then of course, if after the meeting you change your mind and if you didn't raise your hand and you want to be a part of the presentation, either preparation or the actual presentation, feel free to reach out, or if you raise your hand and you change your mind, let us know. But yeah, so Sam, if we can open up public comment on this item, and then we will move on to our main item tonight.
Okay, just give me 1 second. So the discussion is the work group for the recommendation to City Council on April 22nd. If there's anybody in the public that would like to speak on the work group update, please raise your hand. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on the item 5 work group update, please raise your hand. Seeing none, Chair Escobedo, if I can get that in the form of a motion, and I just want to, if I can have somebody confirm the names of those that are wanting to participate.
Yes, so I have the following names listed as either volunteering in the preparation or the presentation. I have Christian Alonso, I have Lizzie Rodriguez, I have Rachel Johnson, Louisa Wood, Serafina Chavez, Ana Cepeda, Rich Sander, and Damo Adamalakin.
Okay, and if I can get somebody to make that motion.
So moved.
Commissioner Wood, seconded, I believe.
I'll second that.
So Commissioner Alonso made the motion, Commissioner Wood seconded, to have those commissioners outlined by Chair Escobedo participate in the recommendation and preparation work group. I will take roll now. Commissioner Adam Leakin.
Yes.
Commissioner Alonso.
Present.
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson.
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Commissioner Sander.
Yes.
Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Vice Chair Zepeda,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ray, no. Motion passes.
Thank you, Sam. We'll close out item 5 and we'll move on to our main item tonight, which is item 6, discussion of feedback from the Santa Barbara Police Department on the draft recommendations. We have Chief Malekian and Lieutenant Sean Hill here to present on their feedback on the draft recommendations. As a reminder for the commission, this is for us to get their perspective and really this is our opportunity to ask questions and try and understand as much as possible so that when we're making our final recommendations, we can take this into consideration along with the survey feedback that we'll go over next week. So I encourage all of the commissioners to please ask the chief and Lieutenant Hill about the memo that they sent out and some of the feedback that we're going to discuss tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Chief Malekian.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo, and good evening, everyone. It's nice to see everyone, and I want to start out. It's hard to believe it has been a year, and I want to commend the commission and the commissioners for the work that you've done. And while I suspect that there may be points of disagreement as we go through the evening, please know that your work and your commitment to what you're doing is noted and appreciated. The position paper and what I've called the recommendation template that I sent out, where I went through each of the specific recommendations and indicated the department's perspective on it. The only notation I would make, as the chair pointed out, is that I recognize that your recommendations may change. And assuming that they do, then obviously both the template and the final position paper would change as well. So this is a draft position based on the most current set of recommendations from this group. And with that, I'll start. I intend actually to keep my presentation relatively short. We have, as I said, I've sent the position paper and the recommendation template out to each of the commissioners. And so I assume that you would have questions either for clarification or points of agreement or disagreement. And I would rather have that conversation than have you listen to me talk for 30 or 40 minutes. But I will start by saying that I have been in policing for 49 years, effective next month. And I have watched this profession change, but I've watched it from a fairly long continuum, I think. I am neither unaware nor naive about the role of policing in the enforcement of racist cultural norms and the enforcement of stereotypes and the use of, and in some cases, excessive use of force over the years. But I'm equally aware of the changes that have occurred in this profession in the 49 years that I have been in it. And those changes have been dramatic. To that end, I view myself as part of a contingent of police chiefs that have spent most of the last 25 or 30 years focused on reform efforts. I will take credit for being the author of a concept that's referred to as collaborative reform under Attorney General Eric Holder and President Obama. And this collaborative reform effort is actually in the process of being brought back by Attorney General Merrick Garland. The underlying premise of that and the underlying premise of really all of my remarks tonight are that true reform and true change is about a change of heart, not merely a change of policy or a change of rules. Some critical points that when I spoke early on in this process that I've made and I've tried to make repeatedly over the last year is that the Santa Barbara Police Department believes that oversight would be mutually beneficial both to the community and the men and women of the Santa Barbara Police Department. This work, however, should and must be done in collaboration with the police department and not outside of it. The oversight model selected should reflect the agency and the community that it serves. And the model for Santa Barbara should mirror the realities of Santa Barbara and not a broader national narrative. And most importantly, in my opinion, the changes to the system, anything that we do, should not denigrate the men and women who do the complex work of policing every day. Some process notes in the beginning of this process. Sean Hill, Lieutenant Hill, has been at, I believe, at just about every meeting that the commission has held. I very deliberately did not attend meetings during probably for the first 6 or 8 weeks. As I indicated before, because I did not want to be accused of trying to manipulate the process or the outcome. But I have attended virtually every meeting since June of last year. The one thing I would note, and I hope that tonight is the beginning of a change of that, is that for the most part, as discussions were being held about specific recommendations or about specific process questions, very, very rarely were either Sean or myself asked questions either about the ability to operationalize that or the potential impacts of the proposed change. I will say, and you've heard me say this before, that I think the decision to exclude everyone from service on this commission who had any law enforcement experience was very disheartening. And it sent a message that really that not all lived experience matter. And I think, and it's a point you're going to hear me make a couple of times, this board has talked extensively about the importance of their independence, and I recognize and respect that. My only point is that independence and collaboration are not mutually exclusive concepts. I did send you some data points about the Santa Barbara Police Department that I think were very illustrative. The first category was in the area of complaints received. Over the last 5 years, we have averaged 20 complaints, and that's of any nature whatsoever, 20 complaints per year, with a high of 44 in 2020, which really reflected the demonstrations and protests following the murder of George Floyd, to a low of 8 last year. Our use of force data is minimal. It's less than 1% as measured by 1/10 of 1% as measured by total contacts. And it's about 2.5% as compared to arrests. And that's any force, including the fact that if you grab someone by the arm and you move them from point A to point B, that is technically a use of force. In the last 10 years, we have had 3 officer-involved fatalities and 1 wounded suspect. The last tragedy was in 2016 when SWAT officers were serving an arrest warrant on an attempted murder suspect, and the suspect fired on the officers as they were approaching the door. I know a couple of commissioners have checked with the city attorney's office with regards to litigation, and I think you've been advised that it's really pretty minimal. There are no substantial payouts over the years for use of force or alleged discrimination. And lastly, on the subject of data points, I would point out that the RIPA, the racial profiling data that is required by the state, we're actually not required to submit our reports until January 1st of next year, but we have been submitting reports since late last year as part of that transparency. My view about what civilian oversight should look like, should encompass is first of all, it should reflect the concerns of the broader city of Santa Monica, and Santa Barbara, and particularly those neighborhoods who have been historically marginalized, and to provide a public forum for community members to convey those concerns about the department. Secondly is to receive complaints from people who allege misconduct by the police department and to forward those complaints to the department with a request for a report from the chief of police as to what occurred and the outcome of the department's investigation as legally appropriate. Third is to identify auditing issues and to direct the chief of police to conduct such audits and report to the review board on the results of those audits. Fourth, to receive regular reports from the chief of police on broad policy issues and to provide recommendations with the expectation of a response from the chief. And lastly, and hopefully almost never necessary, to provide a forum for the community to express concerns about any high-profile incidents and to receive a briefing from the chief regarding such incidents and to provide an explanation to the community. The things I don't believe that the Oversight Board should be involved with is reviewing the personnel records of individual officers, opining on investigations that are currently in progress or making specific disciplinary recommendations, or authorizing outside investigations without the approval of the city administrator. But I will say, and we've talked about this before, and I think it is clarified in the most recent recommendation. I totally concur with the concept that if the department has been given an opportunity to investigate a particular complaint or a particular issue, and the review board does not find the response satisfactory, that the department should be given another opportunity to clarify questions or to answer those things. And if at the end of that second presentation, it is still not acceptable to the review board, then the request for an outside investigation is outlined in this, outlined in your recommendation panel would move forward. The issue of staffing and staffing that board, I think there are many options for doing this. I suspect that, and in some ways it ties into the recommendation that's in there, an assistant city administrator or other designated person within the city administrator's office could certainly do that, perform that role. My thought would be that a contracted outside agency, such as the Office of Independent Review, and I think this actually would be a broader discussion, might, for the first 2 years of the review board's existence, handle that function and allow the newly formed review board to assess exactly what the workload is and to see exactly what model should be brought forward and finalize that over time. And lastly, and I suspect for some commissioners, perhaps not the most desirable, a lieutenant from the police department, similar to Lieutenant Hill, could be assigned specifically to staff that review board. I really only have 3 sort of basic areas of concern in the broad sense. One is I do not believe that the auditor monitor model fits Santa Barbara, and I've said this in the position paper. There's nothing in the opening of the series of recommendations that really justifies that staff or that position. Secondly, is this underlying assumption, and I said this earlier, that somehow independence and collaboration are mutually exclusive. And in my own experience, and I've talked with the commission before about some of my own experiences in developing oversight models in other cities, including Seattle. And every piece of literature that I've ever read emphasizes the need for the police department to be involved, not in the sense of voting on things or reviewing outcomes, but on providing perspective and working together with the review board so that it is truly a collaborative reform process. And I think one question that has not been answered and is going to need to be is, what is the role of the Fire and Police Commission? And I think there are several options that could be looked at in that regards, but I think that's a question that needs to be answered. And in conclusion, I would just say that I believe that when you talk about what what a police agency looks like, what it's supposed to look like. And I recognize that there are arguments about alternative forms of policing. But given the world that we live in and given where we are, the Santa Barbara Police Department is an excellent department. It models best practices and it learns from its mistakes. And I think the data points reflect that. Secondly, and I need to say this because I don't, again, but I personally and the department as a whole supports oversight. I just believe that a review model appropriately staffed is the best fit for this city. And should this prove to be inadequate, should I prove to be wrong, you will have created a foundation that could be built on and expanded upon as it goes forward. This is a new experiment for this city, and it's a new experiment for the police department. And I would ask you to look at it in sort of an evolutionary term. And lastly, regardless of what the commission says in terms of its final recommendations and wherever the city council ends up, the Santa Barbara Police Department is committed to working with this commission as well as the review board as we go forward for the betterment of the city and the men and women of the police department. And I thank you for your time, and I will answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Chief Melekian. And I want to thank you as well for the effort and thought that you put into both the memo and the matrix. It was really helpful to see on paper. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And
now we'll open it up to the commission for any questions that we have for Chief Melekian. Is there anyone that would like to kick us off? Christian?
Hey, Chief Melekian. Thank you for the time and effort that went into the matrix and into the white paper. We appreciate the collaborative effort. And thank you as well to Lieutenant Hill, who's been here with us, I believe, for every single meeting. And, perhaps we haven't had enough opportunities to thank you for the collaborative effort. I don't think other formation committees and other jurisdictions that I've seen have been as lucky to have a collaborative partner in the police department as we have had through the process. I want to talk about the matrix. On the section about the Civilian Oversight Board, you had mentioned that the intent behind a section outlining the duties to foster collaborative relationships with the Santa Barbara Police Department and the other city departments, the intent of this is unclear. And I'm wondering if you could expand upon what's unclear and why you support it, even though it's unclear.
It's unclear in the sense that I'm not sure what was meant by it. I'm not sure when it said foster collaborative relationships with the PD and other city departments, I assume that you were talking about the commission, the Oversight Commission's relationships with those departments. I certainly support that. I just wasn't clear from the wording if there was a broader purpose behind that language. I didn't quite understand it from the perspective of how it was worded.
Do you have any recommendations about how to make that more clear, the intent?
See if I can find what page it was on. It's always a challenge. I guess I might turn the question around. I guess the easiest way is, where do other city departments fit in this? I guess that maybe that's the part that was confusing. Where do other the collaborative relationship with the police department is pretty clear. I just wasn't clear where other city departments fit into that.
No, that makes sense. I think maybe we're being a little too agnostic with the terminology, like city departments, maybe. But I think generally the intent behind it was, you know, as a department of the city, the police department, right, organized under the charter, we felt that, and as a commission organized under the city, that there would be, you know, collaboration happening, not just with between the commission and the police department, but with the city administrator, with the city attorney, with lots of different departments to do the work of oversight.
Well, I had faith in you, so I supported it even when I didn't understand it. So
appreciate it, Chief. I'll let someone else speak.
Rich, Rich, you want to?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Chief Malikian, for being with us. I appreciate your comments. My question actually goes to, I understand based on the number of complaints, the reasoning behind why you would consider an auditor monitor position being a lot for this department. I am curious what your response would be that one of the main reasons for the auditor monitor was to explore trends within the police department over the past years, and also looking at how decisions have been made, or if there were things that were affecting officers of minority or criminals that are being unfairly targeted. Something that is actually looking at data and trends over the course of years, which as far to my knowledge, the Santa Barbara Police Department hasn't had that done. So would you consider something like that, even if it was a one-year contract that at least begins that work so that we can see what emerges from that data?
So Commissioner Sander, I absolutely, in fact, it's actually been in our work program for a couple of years, and in truth, staffing has gotten in the way of doing exactly what you're talking about. One of Lieutenant Hill's at least conceptual duties is to start an auditing process, and I am a firm believer in that. The question is how can or should that best be done? And my position on the auditor monitor is that I don't think you need a formal person assigned to do that, at least at this point. If there were auditing points, for example, you've talked about the issue of maybe doing a longitudinal study around racial context or racial data or disparity. I think that's the kind of thing that could either, one, be handled by either the department could do that at the direction of the review board, or it could be contracted out. When I was the police chief in Pasadena, I contracted with an outside agency on 3 different occasions to get reports on specific, the most notable of which was an investigative process. And what came back from that review was I think it was in the area of 50 or 60 recommendations, some major, many small. And then the department implemented that. And if we had a review board model, in Pasadena, we reported to a public safety committee of the city council, but that's the kind of thing that could be reported to the review board. So the work you're describing is valuable. I'm not objecting to the work. I'm just saying we don't need an auditor monitor to do that. I think it could be done other ways.
So yeah, just to be clear, Chief, you're saying that we could would you be open to considering contracting with a position like that for someone to view that data over the course of 6 months or something to do something like that?
If the constituted review board wanted certain aspects of the department's operations audited, I would support that.
Okay. I think what's interesting is that I don't know if I think the reason for the recommendation, at least from my opinion, was that we're trying to be proactive in it and not necessarily wait for the board to ask for it, that we would be hiring a position where that would be their job to do it. And frankly, like, I totally understand what you mean by staffing shortages. In the nonprofit world, we have a lot of staffing shortages and it's really hindering the workforce. But at the same time, if this would make that move forward, I don't see why we wouldn't pursue that rather than awaiting or hoping for staffing to change. But that's just my opinion. But thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Lizzie?
So to address Commissioner Alonso's question, or actually, I'm sorry, Chief Malekian's statement about where the collaboration occurs, and to add on to Commissioner Alonso's response, throughout the recommendations, you'll see that there are statements where it says the body will work with the city administrator's office or the city attorney's office to develop the process for receiving and processing complaints or for evaluation of the body itself. So in those specific areas is where we're talking about collaboration with city departments. And then also to follow up on Rich's questions and concerns, currently right now, the Santa Barbara Fire Department is conducting an internal audit on its policies, practices, calls for service, and community interaction. Just as information, they're consulting out for that. They're not using their full-time staff to do that. And in this particular instance, nobody asked them to do it. It was the chief's prerogative to initiate this to better their service and response time. So thinking about having an independent or audit office of independent review do that contract work is not out of city practice. So it's in alignment with what's already taking place in the fire department.
Thank you, Lizzie. Serafina?
Hi. First, I just want to say thank you so much, Chief Malekian and Lieutenant Hill. The two documents that you gave us are super, super helpful and just so well organized. And also thank you for your ongoing collaboration and support because it's truly, truly necessary and really, really appreciated by all of us. I did have a question about what you had said. I believe it was in the white paper document, and it was about giving discipline recommendations. So I just wanted to know your opinion of how you foresee the SBPD being affected if the review board is able to give those recommendations, whether it be, positive or negatively affected. But I just wanted to know what you thought.
I would be being disingenuous if I said I didn't have serious concerns about the idea of an outside body that does not have investigative experience to recommend discipline. And I've worked with systems where that occurs, but it's a very different model, and it's a fully staffed investigative process that goes outside the police department. And I think that the biggest concern, I think, quite frankly, especially in the times that we live in, is that very often surprisingly, it doesn't happen often, but when it does, everybody's aware of it, is that there's some high profile incident that generates a lot of public concern. And particularly if that concern is of the perspective that the actions of the police department were wrong. There is a great deal of sort of political pressure, I think, to do something. You see demands to fire officers, surface almost instantly. And for the men and women who do the work, that's a very frightening prospect. And it strikes me that the question for the review board is the department holding people accountable? Are things if there is misconduct, is the review board aware of it? I think that's a piece of it. And are people being held accountable? And I think the question then is can the department do that work? I think our department and as the next year comes up, there are disciplinary cases. I can't remember the deadline. I think it's since January 1st of 2020. There are certain things that meet decertification criteria that will have to be made public. And I think when that happens, you will see that this department, in fact, does hold people accountable, and there are people who don't work here. And in none of those cases where there, well, I shouldn't say none, but in almost none of the cases where there was really any public awareness, but the department was holding itself accountable. So I just have some concerns about saying that this review board should be able to recommend discipline. I think the review board should be able to hold the police chief accountable for maintaining an appropriate level of accountability and discipline within the organization.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Serafina. Rachel?
Okay, sorry, I forgot to unmute. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Chief Mucky. And it was definitely really helpful to read through everything as well and see it written down in the white paper. Since it's been the focus of well, my focus, I guess, with the working group lately, I wanted to ask about the community survey. So that to me is another huge part of the collaborative effort that's been the work of this commission. And hopefully, you know, community engagement will be the work of the eventual oversight board. But at this point, we've done our focus groups and our community feedback survey just closed. So soon, we don't have it yet, but we're basically going to get what I see as sort of another white paper of sorts from the community that I think each of us are here representing in some way. So I've been thinking about the question that we have to ask ourselves as commissioners is if the results of those focus groups and surveys show a lack of support or support for something that maybe we personally disagree with, how are we going to argue and vote for that when it comes to make the final draft recommendations? And I'm thinking about two particular examples, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on those specifically, or just sort of in general about the survey. So one is, let's see, the lived experience with law enforcement. So that's something we specifically asked about. I do think it's important to note that if that recommendation ends up in the final version, you know, it's not that it would exclude SBPD liaisons or engagement with law enforcement. It would just be on the oversight body itself for former law enforcement. So that's one thing that I think we'll learn a lot about from the survey. The other one is complaint data, because actually at your recommendation, after a conversation, I think about that, we included a question about complaints and people filing that. So I think we're going to learn more about maybe folks who have considered about filing requests or tried to and maybe not formally done so. So with those two things as examples, but just in general, just like we're probably going to have to grapple with, do you think your position will also and can also take into account the community feedback that is sort of the other side of that collaboration?
I'm not 100% sure I fully understand the question, but are you saying if the survey around, let's take the first one, the business about being experienced in law enforcement. And let me say that and I think the position on this, even in the discussion among commissioners, has gotten a little bit tangled, because I've never argued that I've never disagreed with the idea that anybody who worked for Santa Barbara PD should not be on the commission. I believe that that's a perfectly valid position, and it's appropriate. What I've said is, and were discussion among the commissioners about, well, if they had been retired for 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, whatever that number is, I think that would be appropriate. But I think that there is this business about the liaison is not the same thing, because if there's an issue in front of the review board, the role of the liaison is to represent the police department, on that issue in this moment. The role of a retired officer serving on an oversight board is to provide the members of that board with another perspective, in the same way that a person who was formerly incarcerated or a person who was homeless or formerly homeless has a perspective about law enforcement and about what's going on. I think all of that lived experience is valuable. So I would make a distinction between a retired person who's serving on a board and the liaison who is an advocate for the police department. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up, because you're right. I think I muddled it with throwing out too many examples. I think my question was basically, do you think the opinions that you laid out in the white paper might change based on the opinions of the community that we're going to see in the survey results? Like, just the way I feel like we as commissioners, or at least I'll speak personally, you know, I'm very much looking forward to seeing those results, because I think I have voted different ways on a couple different issues, and I am really looking forward to having sort of a broader community input to inform my own decisions, I guess, when it comes down to it.
I think it would not, and I say this because I think that's one of those questions, and especially the way it was worded. I think it's one of those questions that's almost borders on, how do you feel about policing in general? What's your take on the current state of American law enforcement? And people who are inclined to be very supportive of the police are probably going to, you know, say that, no, that's a terrible idea. And the people who don't, who feel just the opposite, that, you know, policing needs to undergo major transformations and this and that, are likely to say, no, we don't want anybody, we don't want that person on there. So I don't have that survey result is not going to change, probably not going to change my perspective on it. But I think one of the challenges for this commission is that you are trying to design a model that results in true police reform, in true police oversight, that introduces the concept of civilian oversight of local law enforcement in a meaningful way. And I feel very strongly on a personal level that, and a professional level, quite frankly, that viewpoint on an oversight board has value. And I will tell you from experience that some of the most skeptical people about policing practices are retired police officers. And that's, you know, that's a topic for another time, perhaps. But I think I would stick with my position that has value. And the second, I think your second thing was about the number of complaints, and I'm not sure I followed that one either.
That one wasn't a question. It was just that's something in the survey that I said I'm looking forward to seeing, because we included a question.
I am too, actually, and I appreciate you putting it in there, because I know it was at my request, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dama?
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate your white paper and your thoughts on just the discussion in general. So I had a couple questions. With regard to your concerns about recommending discipline, I was wondering if selecting a civilian oversight board or an auditor with investigative experience would alleviate those concerns, and whether having a disciplinary matrix, as was discussed, that's aligned between the police department and the review board. So we're working with parameters that are, you know, very process-based and very, you know, rigid. There's no like gray areas. Would that alleviate your concerns about recommending discipline? And then if not, you also mentioned that you thought the oversight board should be able to hold the police chief accountable. And if so, then how would you recommend doing that?
Well, I think in point of fact, if you, I'll take the second one first. If the review process that is created has a collaborative relationship, not just with the police department, but with the city council and the local structure, the police chief serves at will. In our city, that police chief serves at the pleasure of the city council. It's an at-will position, can be removed with the stroke of a pen. I remember a local sheriff telling me one time that down in LA, he told me, you have any idea what it's like to run for re-election every 4 years? I said, Sheriff, I run for re-election every Monday night at the city council meeting. I mean, that, and there's truth to that. That's how that is. If the oversight body was so felt that the police chief was stonewalling them, if the police chief was not being forthcoming about specific issues or about whatever the construct is, and that's another point that I didn't really touch on, but I do think one of the things, I'm going to go just off track just for a second, that I think the first year or two of this board's existence is really going to be about constructing the nuts and bolts of what this will look like. What you're designing is this broad concept. There needs to be this sort of operational thing. But if the chief's, going back to it, if the chief's not on board, I think that the oversight body will have more than enough authority and ability to make it very clear that they're not particularly pleased with the police chief, with whatever consequences flow from that. And I've talked so long, I didn't remember the first part.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. So, like, what ways do you think they'll be able to make their displeasure known? Just like, announcing it publicly? Is there specific, like? I
think the challenge that I have with this, and I haven't answered this for myself yet, is how to tell the board. I mean, I think it's one thing. I think, for example, and I've worked in this environment before where once a quarter, depending on the volume, once a quarter, once a year, you report to an oversight body that we had 8 complaints last year. 3 of them were for rudeness. 2 of them were for misconduct, and you spell them out. You can, and this is the discipline that we gave, or this was the findings that we made, and if they were sustained, this is the discipline we gave. In other words, you're reporting in the aggregate. I think that can be done. I don't think there's any sort of personnel questions about that. There are personnel questions and personnel protections about saying Officer Malekian was charged with this and received a 2-day suspension or whatever it was.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I think it's very doable to report to the oversight board on the nature of the complaints that were received over whatever period of time you want, and what the outcome of those investigations was.
Okay, and my second question was, just to go over that again, it was basically, you mentioned that you're concerned about how, the oversight board would not have investigative experience. And I was just wanted your thoughts, like if it would alleviate your concerns if they were actually if that was a part of the requirement is that they had investigative experience. And also if, the last meeting we had, the Boulder auditor, monitor, representative speak about a police, a matrix of discipline where, there was an actual alignment between the police department and the oversight board as to what constitute, what levels of discipline would be aligned with what behavior. So this is a very process-based specific system that doesn't leave, any gray areas. Because I understand that you wouldn't like a system that's just very vague where people are just saying, hey, I think you should get this or that. So I understand that concern, but I was wondering if such a system incorporated into that would alleviate those concerns. And, if not, why?
I have the issue of matrix is interesting, and I have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it does do the things that you are suggesting. It does lay out very clearly, and probably the most common example of where a matrix is used is when an officer is involved in an on-duty traffic accident. And you sort of go through the matrix. Was there injury? Yes or no? What was the extent of the property damage? Yes or no? How many similar accidents have you had? And if this is your first accident in 24 months, you get this. And if it's your second, you get this, and so on. That for a lot of quote unquote routine kind of offenses has value. I think it has less value when you start talking about uses of force or allegations of discrimination, because the nuances of that doesn't lend itself to this sort of clear checkbox matrix. But I'm not going to say that I'm opposed to a matrix. I've seen it work in places. I think it's important, and I think this is one of the areas that I think the commission should, give some thought as we talk about this, is that at some point in the disciplinary process, in the business of if somebody's been, a complaint against an officer has been sustained, in other words, yes, they did what was alleged, and you're going to impose discipline, there has to be a place in this process to look at what is the officer's history. Is this the first offense in 15 years, or is this the 8th offense in 15 years? Is this, what other extenuating factors are there? Somewhere in there, and that's where the chief of police's role comes in, is to say, okay, how do we balance all this? But I'm not opposed to a matrix. I think but that ability to apply some discretion, and I think that's where this issue about explaining to the review board, and especially if we can clarify the issue about closed sessions, I think that there might be more opportunity to have that discussion.
Yeah, I definitely understand your concern, and I think that makes sense. I just at the same time, I just hope you understand, as like a community member, sometimes there is that concern that, if you think for something serious that the police chief should just have that discretion, that you don't think that there should be a process-based system for that, and there's some concern. I mean, based on your credentials and your reviews, I have no concerns about fairness, but there may be in the future another police chief. So that's just the concern. I just want you to understand where that concern comes from, and yeah.
No, I'm very clear on that, and it's kind of why I'm trying to temper my own approach to this with the recognition that we're trying to design a system for the next 10 years, not for the next 10 weeks.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Damo. Christian?
Thank you. So I think one of the things that we've talked a lot over the last year about is data and transparency, and getting to the nuts and bolts of how the department is reporting this to the community and access to information. And so it's really helpful that you provided the additional context about the complaints. I was hoping that you could explain, Chief Malekian, the disparity between the internal report of complaints that you provided to us and the independent police scorecard, which details 180 civilian complaints from the department between 2016 and 2020, in which 10% were ruled in favor of civilians.
I've seen that scorecard. I have no idea where that came from. I have no idea what they're talking about. And the number of complaints that I'm reporting is a matter of public record. I've seen it, like I said, I've seen that scorecard. I've looked at some of the things that they said. There's stuff on there about uses of force that doesn't match up with anything that I know. So I really can't answer that.
Thank you. Lizzie?
So I think it was maybe the second or third meeting I had mentioned that specific scorecard that you're speaking of, Christian, is outdated. And when I originally saw that scorecard, because it's a reputable organization that distributed it, I contacted them and contacted the researchers, and they confirmed that it is outdated information and it comes from a central database that's a bunch of other information is filtered into it. So what they see as data could look different over here versus over here. So I asked them to update it, and they said they didn't have the funding or staffing to do so. So in response, the Santa Barbara Police Department offered their own updated version of the scorecard, which is posted on their website. So there's that answers that. But I had a question, Chief. Chief Malakian, you are well respected in our community. You're well respected in the law enforcement community for many years. And I think that we all here on the commission value your thoughts and suggestions, and even the things that you're not in support of. I think what we're trying to understand is the why. So why would there be an objection to receiving an opinion on discipline? So while ultimately the decision is your decision as the chief or the chief of police's decision. So I'm thinking of myself as the chief operating officer of a hotel company. It is ultimately my decision on personnel issues. How would I feel if the department head also gave me a suggestion on discipline? I think I would welcome that, knowing that it's ultimately my decision to issue discipline. So that's a statement. My question is, would you be open to, or how would you feel about a body receiving investigative summary, offering a judgment of substantiated, unsubstantiated, dismissed, and then having not a discipline matrix, but a matrix of severity of misconduct, that could then be used as consideration for your decision on discipline?
I followed that up to a point. I think the to use your metaphor, that happens in the current disciplinary process. The chief doesn't just think this stuff up on his own. And I think that process has been described to the commission before. The professional standards investigator gathers all the facts, interviews people, or in some cases, in more serious cases, we send it to an outside law firm. We send it to an outside investigator. That happens. The summary of that goes to a lieutenant who makes a recommendation, who forwards it to the commander, who ultimately forwards it to the chief for a decision. I've oversimplified it a little bit, but not much. I think the question of a review board, I mean, it's an interesting concept, because now we're not talking about looking at individual case files. You're talking about, if I understood you correctly, some sort of not broad, but more generalized description of what the offense was. And again, I would argue that at least in the beginning of this process, as this board, builds this car, going forward, as this car gets built, we try we do that sort of aggregate summation, because that's kind of what I was talking about anyway, was to say, here's a list of in whatever time period you designate, here was a list of complaints, the nature of those complaints, what the finding was, and what the discipline was, and allow that review board to decide, well, you know what, we think we should have a bigger voice in this, and you can have that, or it's not being done. But I really am not in favor of starting out in that place, because I'm very concerned, particularly in the environment we're in, about, and you've heard me say this a couple of times, probably tired of it, but there's the men and women who do this work, need to be protected as well.
Thank you for that. And I keep going back as we're having these conversations and grappling with these complex ideas, because right now that's all they are ideas. I keep going back to the 3 questions that support the 13 principles of effective oversight. And the first question is this appropriate size for the context? what are the unintended consequences of any of these elements? And Cami, remind me the third. Does this fit unintended consequences? And I have it written down, but these are important things to consider. And so I'm asking myself, what's the unintended consequence of having civilians who don't have any experience in law enforcement, who may not have HR experience or investigative experience? What's the unintended consequence of a layperson providing disciplinary recommendations? And in that sense, I think there are some consequences that we might want to consider. I also understand that, you know, community calling for oversight included looking at issues or allegations of police misconduct. So how do we marry those two? How do we create a set of recommendations that has minimal unintended consequences?
Is that for me or general?
It's just a general kind of, this is what we're deliberating.
Right.
Oh, that third question was, how do these recommendations support the 13 principles of effective law enforcement?
Thank you for that, Lizzie. Any additional questions, Lizzie? Okay. Any other questions from commissioners? Louisa?
I don't necessarily have some questions. I just have some things that I would like to kind of share with the chief that were here. So I just wanted to start off by saying thank you, Chief McCain, for taking the time to speak to us. You know how much I appreciate your feedback. But I do want to take the opportunity at the moment to just focus on a little more on the point when you stated that few commissioners asked questions of you and Lieutenant Hill throughout this process, sort of insinuating that there hasn't been much collaboration with law enforcement in the development of this oversight. I feel like it's very important for me to take this opportunity to share with you all and the community at large about this particular point. While I understand that it may seem to the community we may or may not have requested sufficient information about department procedure and such throughout our online meetings of the past year, the amount of collaboration between the Commission and Santa Barbara law enforcement has been, I believe, very effective. And I just wanted to share with the community just how much we've done. Since early September, a number of commissioners, including myself, have worked very hard to make meaningful connections. Commissioner Rodriguez and I presented to nearly every officer of Santa Barbara Police Department. We were able to do coffees with commissioners. We went to the Police Academy tryouts, which was so cool. We've gone to pinning ceremonies. Lieutenant Hill has been an active member of our community. We've worked hard to develop relationships with him. Chief Malekian, we brought in NACOL to help us with this whole, with everything. And Chief, I just want to say that we have collaborated so much over the last year, and I just wanted to make sure that the community knew in this public forum that we have worked hard to have these very tough conversations, including things like, including members of law enforcement on the commission and things like that. And I just wanted to make sure that that was understood. Further, I wanted to go back to what Lizzie just talked about in terms of recommending discipline and what harm could that cause, unintended consequences. And I just want to hear, Chief, what would be kind of specifically, can you go into detail what an unintended consequence or what harm it would be to have just a recommendation from another resource? Because you said you have all these recommendations coming from within, but without, what would be some harmful impacts or could be, in your opinion? Thank you for letting me share.
Well, two things, and let me first touch on your opening remarks. I said, in fact, when I started, that the commissioners, I was not referring, when I talked about questions, I was not referring to the outreach that you've done, which has been extensive. We have, I've met with several commissioners offline over the year. Lieutenant Hill has done the same. So I'm not saying that. My point was very specific that in the public meeting, as policies were developed, there were very few questions directed to Lieutenant Hill or myself. But that should not be read as not thinking that I somehow am not acknowledging the work that several of the commissioners have done on a very regular basis. So if that was misstated, then I apologize for that. With regards to unintended consequences, I think there are several, but I think I commented on the most obvious one. That is the issue of those politically high-profile, politically sensitive incidents that involve the police that occur in every jurisdiction sooner or later. And it's why one of my recommendations about what the role of a review board should be would be a forum where the community frustration or community anger, whatever term you want to use, should be brought forward. And at the same time, the police department have an opportunity to explain what occurred. And I have personal experience with this, where there are incidents involving police use of force that the community is incredibly angry and upset about. And these things are never good or bad. They're always cloudy and nuanced, and there's perspectives and there's things. And I have real concerns about it's not to say that commission should not and would not in the forum that I described express their opinions about what perhaps should happen, and the chief should have to explain why whatever the ultimate outcome is, whether that happened. But I don't know that in those volatile events that I want to ask people to risk they need to have faith that the system is going to protect them as well as hold them accountable.
Okay. So I hear all those negative sides of the thing of that, but I also see that there are positive sides to it, which the fellow from Boulder, Colorado showed. Can you explain what some positives might be to have an independent review board provide feedback in a situation that is cloudy, that does have a lot of angry people? When a group of civilians can come in and provide feedback and help support and help the community feel, as you say, have faith. What was it that you said? Having a little bit of faith in the police department. What if a civilian board can help with that, help develop that faith by being able to just be another voice? And it could be a voice in discipline or something else.
I think if we're going to have that discussion, there needs to be a lot more specificity about what that board looks like and how that information is gathered. I think as I said at the beginning of this, I'm commenting on the broad, general concept of what that would look like, and I'm not in favor of it. If as we drill into it or develop, a more specific model, that may be a discussion, another discussion that we could have.
Okay, so it sounds to me that having very specific guidelines or feedback to further the discussion would be needed. Is that correct?
I think so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. Dama?
Yeah, this is just a general, just for commission members. I just want to highlight in our last discussion, with the Boulder Independent Audit Monitor, he did mention that there's an upside to the fact that if there is like a process matrix that both the chief and the Civilian Oversight Board can come to, it does that like independent voice, the Louise was mentioning would allow for just, I guess, more public confidence in the system from both sides, because I think you have one person who's the chief of police, but then you also have the public, and the person who's affected is a public citizen. So I think there should be that balance. If you have that balance and them aligning between the independent public, whatever, oversight board and the police chief, I think that's where a lot of the issue is coming from. The lack of confidence in the public is that it's like a one side. That's just my I just want to share that based on remembering our conversation with the Boulder Independent Monitor.
Thank you, Damo. Serafina?
Hi, I had a question about the membership qualifications. In your comment, you had said that 11 at-large members and 2 alternates seemed a little bit too big of a number. Did you have a specific number in mind? Yeah, just let us know.
I mean, normally, and this is just me, I mean, I think that's one of those I said it's not really up to me anyway, but it's whatever they want to design. Usually, I know it's not ironclad, but usually commissions don't exceed the size of the elected body that appoints them. So in this case, it would be 7, but I also know that that's not 100% true. So I'll leave it to better minds than mine. It just 11 seemed pretty unwieldy.
Yeah, thank you. I think just to explain, I think we had chosen that number just because we were planning on staggering the terms, but then also it is quite a few years of commitment. So we were definitely expecting some people to drop out, family, whatever life events happen. But maybe we could, I mean, this is still something that we will be discussing, but do you feel maybe more comfortable with the number 9?
Again, I don't. I think I was just looking at the matrix. I didn't have an opinion on that. That was just an observation on my part.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Serafina. Any other questions from the commission? Louisa?
Oh, yes, Chief, thank you. I would like to bring it back to the auditor monitor piece because I know that you feel that is an unnecessary role in our city. Because of the number of investigations that are required. It was also brought up that looking at data trends, I know Commissioner Sander brought that up, but there's also the community engagement piece, which I believe is an integral part of what that position will be, what that position will entail. Can you describe, if we didn't have something like that, is there another way we could get to the community engagement piece outside of an auditor monitor?
Presumably, whoever staffs the review board, and indeed the review board members themselves, would be engaged in that process. I think, to me, that for starters, I mean, I think one of the things that if I was auditing the police department, and this was an area of concern to me, one of the first things I would want to audit is what is the nature of the police department's outreach and what does that look like? And is it sufficient? And is the feedback that they're gaining accurate? And again, if you really felt as a review board, and now I'm talking to you as if you were the review board, really felt that was an area of concern, then I would consider, contracting, making that a subject of an audit, or the community surveys that we've discussed about what is the sense of the police department. That's what I mean about that first 2 years. I think there's going to be a lot of shaping that goes into that, because and I know the commission made a very conscious decision, partly because of time, to not do that complex community survey about how do people feel about the police department. That maybe that's one of the first orders of business for the new review board, is to measure that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. Any other questions before? I have a few questions. I don't see any hands. Thank you again, Chief Malakian, for spending so much time with us and really answering our questions. I want to go back to the data that you had shared about complaints And I imagine compared to other jurisdictions, these are really low numbers, and they appear that way anyways from my perspective. But is it fair to say that this might not represent the full picture? And I'll follow that up with when a community member reaches out to the Santa Barbara Police Department and inquires about filing a complaint, do we ever document that as a data point?
I'm trying to nuance my answer. If someone calls, very often what will happen is someone may call, and for example, we had one the other day. A woman called. She's renting a loft in a business district, and there's a silent alarm, and two officers respond to this loft, and there's an open door. They don't respond to the loft; they respond to the business. They have no knowledge that somebody actually has a residence in the upstairs area. They're searching the building. They're searching the building with their guns drawn because they don't have any idea what's in that building. They get to the loft, again, not knowing it's a loft, it's just a door. They push it open. This woman's there. She didn't even know that they were there. Oh, everybody, she explains what's going on. That's sort of the end of that. But she calls to complain because she doesn't know why there were two officers and ultimately a third who was a sergeant. She didn't know why they had their guns out. She wanted to know, she had questions about why they were doing what they were doing, and it bothered her. And her questions were answered by the watch commander. And at the end, I think she was satisfied with that explanation. I don't know that that would be captured anywhere, because that really, it's bordering on a complaint, but she really was trying to understand, why are we doing what we're doing? If somebody actually calls and says they want to file a complaint, that is captured. We are required by law to take that complaint and document it and note it. Even if, and this happens, even if the person filing the complaint, they say Officer Malekian screamed obscenities at me when he stopped me, and a quick look at the chart will reveal that Officer Malekian is not only not at work that day, but Officer Malekian was on vacation somewhere else. But that complaint still gets documented because that person said they wanted to file a complaint. So we do capture that, but there is certainly some gray area at the front end, as in the first example I described.
So what you're saying is that there are not, well, it kind of sounds both ways. So there are some situations where people intend to file a complaint, but then don't, and that's not documented. And then there are other situations in which they intend on filing a complaint and maybe don't, and it is documented. Is that what I'm hearing?
If the person says they want to file a complaint, they're very specific about that. They want to file a complaint. We don't have discretion about that. We are required to document that occurred, even if it's very clear on its face that this is unfounded. And that happens a lot, especially when we're dealing with mentally ill people in our business. But we take them, we investigate them, we do all of that. The ones that don't necessarily get counted are the ones where like the woman I described, who was really questioning about process. She wasn't really asking to file a complaint. She was asking to say, why did you do it this way? Why were there two officers in my building? Why did they have their guns out? That's an explanation, and that might not be captured. That wouldn't be captured as a data point.
Okay. And then is it also fair to say that there may be community members that would like to file a complaint but don't feel comfortable doing so with the current complaint process, or perhaps don't even know that there is a complaint process?
I certainly think that's possible. And it's one of the reasons I've said, I think one of the functions of the review board is to provide an alternative manner for people to file complaints like that.
Thank you. there was a comment that was made earlier about, and I think you made this comment, Chief, but if not, please correct me. It's about the Civilian Oversight Board being able to direct the Santa Barbara Police Department to produce audits in particular areas. The Santa Barbara Police Department would do so, or contract with an outside service. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's what I said.
So there was also another comment, this wasn't yours, I believe it was another commissioner, about the consequences of having lay people on a commission and the consequences of their decisions. We were talking about it in the context of discipline, but in the context of this particular example of directing audits and focusing on areas that are of interest for the COB, when we're talking about a group of lay people, wouldn't that be an argument for having staff support like the auditor monitor, who's a professional in police oversight, to help provide that context and help provide some of the information that the commission members or the oversight board members may not have? It's similar to how our other boards and commissions operate, right? And I would fall back on my experience on the planning commission. We have planning staff that provide context, write the staff reports for us. I could see this being similar. Isn't that an argument for having a police oversight professional staff the board?
It's an argument, but not, in my opinion, not the best one. I think it's an argument for, I think any of the options that I laid out would accomplish the same thing. And I think I wouldn't equate, I think discipline, the issue of discipline versus the issue of audits and what's of interest to the public. Why does the police department, what's the police department's pursuit policy and why do they do that? You know, how many pursuits are they in? You can, the list can go on of things that could be audited. I think that's perfectly appropriate because presumably what they're doing is they're reflecting public or community interest in how their tax dollars are being spent. And whoever does that audit, I don't think certainly it could be an auditor monitor. I don't know that that's, as I've said, I don't think that's particularly necessary in Santa Barbara because I think there's other ways to get that work done. And to use your planning commission example, I think if there was a police lieutenant who was assigned as a liaison, that would be part of that person's job. But you could also contract that out. I was not to go aside, but one of my life adventures was to participate in a process with the Garda Síochána, which is the Irish National Police Department, and they have a completely separate body that does nothing but audits. Now it's a national police department, and so there's scope there, but there's ways to do that other than hiring an auditor monitor.
I appreciate that. So one of the other issues that comes up is you had mentioned that one of the tasks or goals for the department is to produce some of these audits, but because of a shortage of staffing, you haven't been able to do it. A concern I have is that even when directed by the Civilian Oversight Board, that audits like these get put on the back burner because other things come up. And it's not to say that they weren't justified reasons. I totally think anybody can look at the last couple of years and understand why. But I guess, do you acknowledge the validity of that concern? And how would you see that playing out if we were to go something to the route of just a review board and directing the police department? And I also want to add the additional context that it has been brought up multiple times about the budget concerns. And so there are also additional budget concerns where maybe the COB wants to do an audit in a particular area or multiple areas, and they're told no, right? Versus if you have a staff member that's dedicated to a number of things, it's going to be community outreach, support for the Civilian Oversight Board, working with the police department to work on these projects that are on their project list to get those done. Do you acknowledge the validity of that concern? And then also, if we went just with the review board, how do you see that playing out? Obviously, there are more details to determine, but I'm curious, in your mind, in an ideal situation, what would it look like?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. For starters, the recommendations that you're talking about, somewhere this is going to end up being an ordinance, and the ordinance is going to have certain specific directions in it. And if you hire an auditor monitor, and I was at the meeting where he talked about it, he can't do those audits. He doesn't do those audits by himself. He does those audits in conjunction with police department staff and other staff who gather the data and who do things and help him with that work. The issue of staffing is always going to be there, but if in fact the staff support was wherever it landed, whether it was an outside contract, whether it was a police lieutenant, whether it was an assistant city administrator, if conducting those audits is a directed part of the mandate of that oversight board, then I think that puts more heft behind the issue of getting it done. And again, you could use the same argument, say, yeah, we should have an auditor monitor. That can be a fourth option on the list that I provided. I'm just saying it's not the only one.
That's fair. The reason I'm focusing on the auditor monitor portion is because looking at your memo and looking at the matrix you provided, it seems like that is the bulk of your concern. And I'd like to get to the heart of that concern on what it actually is, because I see this position as a potential opportunity for collaboration and an opportunity for the police department to get a lot of really good feedback and input that has been one of your tasks or goals, but because of other conditions, you haven't been able to do it. This is an opportunity to get some of that work done and collaborate at the same time of building broad public trust in the institution and in the process. And I'm curious about what about the auditor monitor piece is of major concern to you.
Well, I think I've been pretty clear that I just think it's unnecessary, and it's not the same as saying that I'm somehow opposed to oversight, because I think I've made it clear that I'm not. I suppose philosophically, if you want to look underneath all of that, I feel very strongly that the chief of police should be held accountable for the things that happen or don't happen, as the case may be. And whatever the direction is, whatever the city council says, this is what oversight is going to look like, the police department is going to carry that out. I don't think you and I are talking about different things or different objectives, but I do think we're probably talking about different methodologies. I just don't believe. I think that's an unnecessary expense. I think it's has the potential to become overly bureaucratic and less responsive. But I think a review board staffed, however, wherever we land, I think would get to the same objectives that you're talking about.
But I guess I'll explain a little bit about what I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with the fact that part of this is that the internal investigation process, the complaint process, a lot of this information has not purposely, but has not been accessible to a lot of community members. And there hasn't been that, part of this is building that trust between the broader community and the Santa Barbara Police Department and in its processes. And I worry that having just a civilian oversight board staffed by someone who is not a police oversight professional, it looks like civilian oversight in name only, and it looks like an advisory board as opposed to something of real accountability either to the police chief or the Santa Barbara Police Department, but also it undermines the ability for that same oversight board to advocate on behalf of the Santa Barbara Police Department when you all are doing a good job. And I think we can all on this commission acknowledge that we are very fortunate to have the police department that we have, but it's not to say that there are not areas that we need to improve on. I'm afraid that a civilian oversight board alone will undermine the ability to actually build that trust and do that work. I guess that's what I'm working through, and I'm trying to figure out, is there a way in which you would be supportive of the auditor monitor role? Because I think one of the most positive components of that is the day-to-day making sure that Santa Barbara Police Department continues to meet its high standards and exceed it in improving the areas of opportunity for the Santa Barbara Police Department, even beyond yourself, beyond Lieutenant Hill, 10 years from now, to make sure that we continue a high level of service and improve on that in the areas where we might not be meeting that high level. Is there a way to get that you think you could be supportive of the auditor monitor function?
I think there's, you confirmed one point of mine, which is that we have, I think, fairly similar objectives. I too want this department to be better in 10 years than it is today. I want it to be better next year than it is today. And I think that's a shared goal. I think policing is undergoing, American policing and Santa Barbara policing is undergoing an evolution of change. I think, I don't know whether I said it to this commission or elsewhere, but this is probably, in my 49 years, this is probably the third or fourth major sort of evolution that's taken place. I don't believe that right now, in this time and place, that you know, or any of us know, whether that auditor monitor is necessary. I don't happen to believe that it is, but I also happen to think, and I think I said this in my opening remarks, as this review board gets formed, and I don't think any of the 5 things that I suggested as a function of the review board makes it an advisory board or makes it a sort of a board and a review board in name only. I think the ability to order audits, I think the ability to receive complaints, I think the ability to ask for specific reports from the chief of police, those are not insignificant things. And I think those are, huge steps in the right direction. And if over the course of designing this thing, it becomes apparent that there is more work or something starts to change, that's another discussion. I just don't think we're there today. And I don't think we need to be there today.
Okay. Thank you for that, Chief. Lizzie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the purpose statement. So the concept of developing an oversight in name only, I think that this commission needs to be careful in remembering that we are creating a body that will be appropriate for our community and be satisfactory to the whole community. So looking at the purpose statement, the Santa Barbara community has called for creating an entity to provide civilian oversight of the Santa Barbara Police Department. This entity will ensure SBPD is responsive to concerns and needs of all members while promoting transparency, accountability, and building public trust between community and SBPD. That's the purpose that we as a commission developed. So when we're talking about scope and the details, we need to come back to this purpose. As I was hearing the conversation between you two, I was thinking that I wonder if there was a confusion in semantics of Because what I'm hearing is not the chief saying he doesn't think that auditor monitor is important. I think what I'm hearing is that he doesn't think a full-time staff member is necessary. And I want to clarify that to see if that's how I'm hearing it correctly. And then just, kind of bringing it back to the purpose of this oversight body.
And so I'm gonna take the same sort of careful approach, because I need my words to be very specific, so I don't get quoted out of context in about 3 weeks. I think the auditing function, the importance of auditing various aspects of police department operations is very important, and is a critical role for an oversight body. I think that's a requirement. You said it very accurately. I do not think that there needs to be a full-time staff or an Office of Police Accountability or anyone else to do that. And I think the proof of whether I'm right or wrong will be the first time that the review board asks for an audit in whatever context, however we decide that should be staffed, or how that work should be done, which is one of those, building the car things that we haven't really answered and probably aren't going to answer here, about how that work gets done. I think when that first audit report comes in, it will set the template for, what, this will work for us, or no, it won't work for us. This is incomplete, it's insufficient, it's not what we need it to be. So I hope I haven't been too vague.
And if I may, thank you, Lizzie, for that, and Chief Malakian. But if I understood correctly, one of your suggestions was an additional lieutenant for the Santa Barbara Police Department to staff the oversight board. Is that right?
I said that was one of 3 options.
So when I hear that, that's an additional position to staff the oversight board, but you're against staffing it with a police oversight professional.
In reality, when this commission was created, Lieutenant Hill was taken out of his duties and assigned to be the liaison to this commission, and that position was never replaced. So the work that was being done by 3 people in managing and overseeing our patrol operations is now being done by 2. So in effect, one of the things I was suggesting, that if there is going to be staff, what I said is there's 3 options. It could be an assistant city administrator, it could be a lieutenant in the police department, or it could be, a contracted, an outsourced body, at least for a couple of years. And actually, if you remember, the order that I put it in was the police lieutenant was last, because my assumption is that would probably be the least desirable from the perspective of the Oversight Commission.
Thank you for that. Last question for now is, that's it for now. I'll come back in a little bit. Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Louisa?
Hi, sorry. I'm just going to kind of go back to your white paper again, and just talk about you made the comment that the CFC chose to follow the broad national narrative and developed a more complex model that is more appropriate for an organization that is larger and or more troubled than Santa Barbara Police Department. And I believe that's what we're talking about right now. I just want to make a statement that you sort of insinuated that we kind of jumped into this hybrid model without really looking at the size of the city, different models, what would be more appropriate. And I just want to make sure we all remember that it took us nearly 4 months of research, reading, examining civilian oversight systems across the United States, especially focusing on cities of smaller sizes that are similar to and makeup that are similar to Santa Barbara. We worked directly with Lieutenant Hill from the beginning to learn about specifically the Santa Barbara Police Department, directly examining, current procedures, policies, the number and type of Santa Barbara Police Department's complaints that have been filed before we came to this decision, this very difficult decision. So I hear you, Chief, that your opinion is that it's not the right size of city and needs of the city, but I believe that that we came to this decision with a lot of research behind us. And I feel like we need to, and I'm going to do what Lizzie did. I'm going to take us back to that very beginning and remember how long it took us to get to this point. So I would also like us to take into account what the auditor monitor from Boulder said and what the benefits of having an auditor monitor piece could entail. So I just wanted to make that comment, Chief, that we did not jump into this model lightly.
Thank you, Louisa. If it's okay with the commission, we've almost been on for 2 hours. If we could take a 10-minute recess, if that's all right with everyone, and then we'll come back for last questions and discussion.
Is there actually more questions?
Well, yeah, I guess to the commission, are there any other questions? I do have a couple more questions.
I have a couple as well, so we could take a break and then come back.
Okay, maybe a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 7:25. All right, we are in recess. Welcome back, everyone. We will call this meeting back to order at 7:27 p.m. And we will continue with questions. I don't imagine that we have many more, but Anna, did you want to kick off the questions?
You can go first, Gabe.
Okay, thank you. Chief, so in our previous discussion, we talked a lot about the auditing function and the ability of the possible ability of the COB to direct audits and for us to be able to contract out that work. From our discussion with Joey Lapari from Boulder, Colorado, one of the other important components of his role and would be an important component of potentially having an auditor monitor is actually the monitoring portion, to monitor to make sure that we are following policies and procedures, but specifically as it pertains to the investigation process and having a police oversight professional follow an investigation all the way through to make sure that policy and procedures are being followed, but also because we all have our blind spots or we all miss things from time to time, being able to suggest follow-up questions or focusing on areas that might be a gap in the investigation or that might be of interest to the COB. What is your opinion about that role? We've heard about your support for auditing, but what is your opinion of the monitoring role?
I think that the reality of monitoring is a reflection of community concern. The Boulder incident or the Boulder model, as I recall, grew out of a controversial incident. That was the impetus for it. This model, and we've talked about this before, is growing out of an attempt to proactively put something in place to help us as a community deal in an appropriate way with making sure that our police department is doing what it's supposed to do, that it reflects the community that it serves, and all those kinds of things. So the question about monitoring is when is it necessary, and at what point? And I don't know that there's been a case made for monitoring. Monitoring, and I've been involved in some monitoring projects, usually is when there's a specific piece there's a specific flaw that attempts are being made to address, and a monitor is assigned, and here's points 1 through 10, and these are the things that need to be done. I mentioned in my presentation about collaborative reform, and one of the ways collaborative reform works without a formal monitor, I might add, and the most successful one that I'm aware of, because I was personally involved in it, was in Las Vegas. And there had been 3 controversial shootings over about 18 months. And the community was very concerned, and they were really concerned about what protocols was the department using to deal with mentally ill people, for example. And ultimately, the community, so the community in the collaborative reform model, the community and the police department sit down under the aegis of a third-party facilitator. And whether that's, in this case, it was DOJ, that was my job. But it could be NACOL, it could be the Office of Independent Review. I mean, I don't know if NACOL does that work, but it could be anybody. But the short version is that this community in Las Vegas identified 75 specific reforms that they wanted to have done. And the police department reviewed that list and committed to do all of them within the next 12 months. And 12 months later, they had done 74 of the 75. They did that without a formal monitoring process. DOJ just came back and reviewed, and everybody was in consensus about what occurred. So in that case, they had defined the issues that they were trying to review. They had identified the issues or concerns that they felt needed to be monitored. And so that's my take on how monitoring should work. In this case, as of right now, we don't have a specific problem we're trying to monitor. We haven't even identified what the specific reforms are. Now there are some. I'm sure there are some. I'm sure that this review board will come up with things that are of concern to it, and we will figure out a way to do that. But I would argue that we're not there today.
So I guess one of the attractive pieces of having the monitor function is, and one of our goals is to build public trust in the process. And when you have a person or a body, for what it is, that's able to actually witness the process all the way through and can support the statement when you say, we follow a just process, and you have a third party that can verify that, it lands a little bit differently for the parts of our community that are skeptical, that have not had a positive relationship with law enforcement in general. And I'm wondering, and from what it sounds like, and again, I don't ever want to get you out of context, but it almost sounds like we need to wait until something bad happens before we implement something like this. And in reality, you have an auditor monitor to be proactive in order to get ahead of a lot of these issues, to build that public trust on the front end, so that when something, and I think I've heard you say this before in one of our meetings, is unfortunately, it's a matter of time before we have a charged event. That's not to say any wrongful doings, just to say that likely over time it's going to happen. I guess based on the way I framed kind of the way I view auditor monitor functions and the way I kind of digested the information you shared, is that accurate? And do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I feel like we're just going around in a circle. I understand that you very sincerely believe that the auditor monitor role is appropriate, and I just don't.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get to is, is what is it about the auditor monitor function? Because inherently it's supposed to be, from the research that we've done, from the basically all of the presentations we've reached, it's supposed to be a more proactive model or portion of the model. And what I'm hearing from you is we have to wait until some event happens before you would be supportive of something like that.
If you heard me say that we were supposed to wait for a bad event to happen, then I'm going to have to brush up on my communication skills, because I think I've been very clear about how I feel about oversight and how I feel about accountability and transparency. We're not talking about those concepts now. We're talking about a methodology, and you're advocating for one way to get at that issue, and I'm just saying that I don't agree with that issue. I think there are other ways to accomplish what you want to.
Then my question to you is, how do we accomplish people's public trust if we were going to go with just a review board, what you suggested in your white paper? What is the best way so that people feel like that process, that investigation process, when there's not a third party witnessing it and being able to verify, how do we build that public trust in that process?
Well, I'm not quite sure I accept the premise that there's no verification. I think presumably if you ask the chief of police to report on a specific issue to a review board, and the chief came in there and said X, Y, and Z, the review board would either believe the chief or they wouldn't, and they would have specific reasons why they didn't. And I'm, as I said before, I'm not naive that there are about the fact that there are communities that have low trust in law enforcement, including Santa Barbara, and that suggests to me that we all have more work to do. We're not talking about that. We're talking about you're arguing for one specific method, and I'm just saying that there are others.
Right, and I'm saying that when you have someone who gets to witness the interview footage, that gets to see the documents, and then can verify, it's different than receiving a report from the chief of police on that information. And I guess I'll leave it at that, but that's the part that I'm trying to work through is there a way for us to accomplish the same type of public trust building and perception of legitimacy? It's not to say it's not a legitimate process, but perception of legitimacy without having somebody have access to the actual firsthand information.
Well, I think we'd have to have a discussion about two things, actually. One is what is firsthand information and how would that be defined? And I think that goes to that whole area or a whole issue of what data is there, what will the board look at, what circumstances and all that. The second thing is you keep saying about building public trust, but I would again argue that one of the first orders of business of a review board ought to be a more in-depth community survey to determine what is the level of trust or distrust and where is it, so that we can figure out where to focus it. I don't know that we've made that case yet.
Fair enough. Thank you, Chief, as always. I really appreciate it. Anna, did you want to ask your question?
Hello, are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank
It's
you.
a little faint. Is there a way to turn up the?
Okay, are you able to hear me now?
It's still somewhat faint. Chief, can you hear?
Barely.
Okay. Hello?
If you say the question, I can repeat it if the chief can't.
It's more of a comment rather than a question.
Okay.
Okay, so are you all able to hear me? I just want to make sure that it's clear and that you all understand what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So earlier we were talking about like alternative matters and about how the complaint process is and like submitting the data and like what the numbers were showing, right? And so as we have learned in previous meetings too, is that the submitting the complaints it wasn't even working for a couple of years, you know? So it was very difficult for people to even do that or have accessibility for that, right? And so also, like, I also want to uplift what Luisa keeps bringing up, which is the process that we have done this past year, right? And so the process that we have taken, you know, Chief Malakian, you've been in these meetings like multiple times, you know, Sean Hill has been in these meetings multiple times. Most of the feedback and the presentations that us as a commission have given have been almost 50% have been towards law enforcement and the community that we have provided. It's, you know, in my opinion, it should have been more community than law enforcement, but that's what it was, you know? And so that is also telling on the fact that when we were trying to get like feedback for the surveys, getting people to sign up for the meetings, and folks trying, like this weekend we went out, we were trying to get people to do the surveys. A lot of folks did not feel safe to complete those surveys. And this is just an opinion. This isn't even submitting a complaint. This isn't even like talking about like, oh, you know, we're not law enforcement, obviously. So if they were even afraid to share their opinion on a survey that we were telling them that it's anonymous, that is very telling to me on how they would actually feel on submitting a complaint to law enforcement, or if we have a law enforcement in our commission, in the actual commission, which is something else that we have been talking about or going back and forth. But I'm glad that we're leaning more towards not, obviously. And so, and also with not hiring somebody that's outsourced, or when it was stated that, you know, maybe we can review that, reevaluate that in a later time if maybe we do need to hire somebody. That doesn't really give me much hope as well, because even to get the materials, the city was supposed to provide us with materials or printouts or this and that, and we didn't even get support on that most of the time. So if we're not able to even get a couple printouts on things, like that doesn't really give me much like sense of trust that we will be able to reevaluate, like getting, you know, somebody out, being able to outsource in the future. So that's why for myself, I can only speak in regards to myself. It's important to make sure that we have this information, we have these, this position now set before, and then if we realize later on that we don't need to hire somebody outside, then we can reevaluate it that way.
Thank you, Anna. Any other questions or comments from the commission? Not seeing any. Chief, I wanted to open it up to you if you had any closing remarks or anything that you want us to know, especially, obviously you and Lieutenant Hill will be a part of our meetings as we make our final edits, but I know I'm going to be reflecting on today's meeting and next week's meeting before we make our final edits. Is there anything that you wanted to really get across to the commission or focus on from your white paper?
No, I just want to repeat, you know, where I started, which is that even those areas where we disagree, I genuinely appreciate the commission's work and the approach that's been done with this. And Lieutenant Hill and myself are both available in the, you know, for information discussions or any questions that you or any of the commissioners have as you finalize your recommendations. And once those are done, as I said, I'll edit the white paper and the recommendation template accordingly.
Thank you, Chief Malakian. And again, I just want to say thank you to yourself and Lieutenant Hill and the full commission for all of your thoughtful questions and comments and answers. And we threw a lot at you tonight, and appreciate it.
Thank you, and see you soon.
Sam, if we can open up public comment.
Sure, give me 1 second. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 6, discussion of feedback from Santa Barbara Police Department on the draft recommendations, please raise your hand. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 6, please click on the hand raise feature. I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. And we will close out item 6. Thank you, everyone. And for future business on item 7, I'll just highlight again. Hopefully next week we should be getting preliminary findings from the outreach effort, both the focus group and the survey information. It'll soon be followed up with a official memo from Center for Court Innovation. Following that, we'll have back-to-back Wednesday meetings where we will focus on final edits, and our joint meeting with City Councils on April 22nd at 1 p.m. So anything else that anyone else wanted to add? Not seeing it. So with that, we will call this meeting over at 7:45 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.